The cold was the first thing Colin Akecheta felt, long before the siren or the smell of burning pine. It was the kind of deep chill that steals the breath right out of your lungs and replaces it with sheer panic. He gripped the ledger, its leather cover slick with a desperate sweat that had nothing to do with the temperature. This wasn't just a book. It was a death warrant. And now, with the ancestral home turning into a blazing inferno behind him, Colin knew he was running out of time and out of allies. Every choice he'd ever made had led to this moment of frigid, desperate betrayal. The biting wind that night didn't just carry snow. It carried the deep, spiritual loneliness of the high desert. Deputy Colin Akecheta drove his patrol cruiser along the ice-sheeted roads of the Navajoland Reservation, the yellow sweep of the headlights barely punching through the whiteout. It was December, and the weather here didn't just feel like winter. It felt biblical. Every shack, every abandoned vehicle, every mile marker was buried under a shroud of thick, merciless white. Akecheta was a quiet man, his face weathered not just by the wind, but by the slow, corrosive frustration of his job. He was one of the few who still tried to uphold the law in a place where tradition and desperation often tangled tighter than the barbed wire fences. Lately, the weight of his badge felt heavier than the blizzard itself, a symbol of a promise often broken by the very system he served. The reservation was beautiful, yes, but it was also scarred by unseen hands. The slow poison of outside drugs, the whispered corruption that always seemed to start at the top. His radio crackled, the voice of the dispatcher, barely audible over the static and the howl of the storm, cutting through his thoughts. Unit 23, I've got a 905 call, possible animal cruelty. Caller's jumpy, says it's near the old Black Mesa site. Sounds like gasoline. Repeat, gas. Akecheta's knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. The Black Mesa site. Everyone called it the Hollow Grave. It was an abandoned coal mine turned into a ghost town. A dark, rusting skeleton where the only inhabitants were shadows and bad memories. If you wanted to do something that needed to disappear entirely, a crime, a body, a moment of madness, you went to the Hollow Grave. 23 copy, Akecheta confirmed, the urgency overriding his fatigue. Approaching the old Highway 59 junction now. Estimated time of arrival, 5 minutes. As he turned onto the unplowed dirt track leading toward the mine, the cruiser began to slide, the tires fighting a losing battle against the ice. He killed the siren, not wanting to announce his presence, relying solely on his dimmed headlights and the thick silence of the storm. The caller hadn't sounded like a prank. They had sounded terrified, mentioning a man, a German shepherd, and that pervasive, sickening smell of fuel. When he finally reached the edge of the abandoned site, Akecheta parked the cruiser behind the rusted shell of an old fuel tanker truck. He grabbed his coat and flashlight, the beam a thin, trembling sword against the blinding snow. The wind here was a physical force, a relentless bully pressing him down. The call had mentioned an old derelict filling station near the mine entrance. He saw it now, a skeletal aluminum awning, the pumps vandalized and covered in frozen graffiti. And underneath that awning, casting a strange, distorted shadow against the blizzard, were two figures. One was a man, Mick, swaying and desperate, holding a red jerry can and a tattered oil rag. The second was a large German shepherd, massive and starved, holding its head low with a resigned, weary dignity. Then Akecheta saw the glistening puddle around the dog's paws. The sharp, acrid scent of gasoline hit him. Mick fumbled in his pocket, and Akecheta saw the quick, sharp flare of a match being struck. Time seemed to collapse. Akecheta ran, shouting, "Police! Drop the match! Drop it now!" The man startled, flicking the tiny, violent flame away. It landed inches from the soaked dog. Akecheta crashed into Mick, pinning him against the pump. "What in God's name are you doing, Mick?" Akecheta roared. Mick didn't fight back, only sobbed. "I had to. They told me to. It's evidence, man. They said it had to burn." Akecheta pulled the German shepherd clear. As he dragged the heavy animal, a tattered rag near its paws fell away, revealing the dog's right shoulder. And there, starkly visible through the dirt and the oil, was a brand. A perfect, six-pointed, stylized star of fire. That wasn't a stray. That was the insignia of the elite K9 units. The dog was wearing the ghosts of its past. "Coda," Akecheta whispered. The name of his old friend Ben's lost partner leaving his lips like a prayer and a curse. The dog looked up at him. In its eyes, there was only a profound, silent, and heartbreaking recognition. The whispered name, "Coda," felt louder than the blizzard. It cracked through the sterile officialdom of Akecheta's uniform and struck the man deep in his heart, where the loss of his friend, Officer Ben, still lay like fractured ice. Coda didn't whimper or growl. He leaned his heavy, soaked head into Akecheta's side, a silent affirmation of the name. Akecheta secured Mick's hands with zip ties. Mick, gasping and shivering, kept repeating, "Had to burn it, officer. Had to burn the evidence." The six-pointed star of fire brand, the unique insignia of the Special Forces K9 units, was unmistakable. It confirmed the terrifying impossibility. Coda, the K9 officially declared dead 3 years ago in the Black Mesa drug bust gone wrong, was alive. The memory of Ben, found crushed beneath a collapsed mine shaft support, with Coda nowhere to be seen, was sharp. The official report, signed off by everyone, including the sheriff, read, "Officer Ben died in an unavoidable accident. K9 Coda is presumed dead." Akecheta had known it was a thin story. The moment was shattered by the grinding sound of a 4x4 engine. 2 more sets of headlights pierced the whiteout, too fast for a blizzard response. The first vehicle belonged to Sheriff Elias, the long-serving head of the reservation police. He stepped out, trailed by Deputy Silas. "Deputy Akecheta, what in the name of the ancestors is this mess?" Elias's voice was clipped. He approached, placing a heavy hand on Akecheta's shoulder, a gesture of ownership and control. "Animal cruelty? You should be securing the roads." "Coda is dead, Deputy. This is a stray. It needs to be put down immediately. Standard procedure for a potential biohazard." Elias reached for his sidearm. Akecheta's heart hammered. He knew if Elias saw the star of fire, the truth would be buried permanently. "Sheriff, with respect, I need to check its chip and—" "No. You don't need anything but to follow orders, son." Elias snapped. "Secure the drunk. Silas, you take care of this rabid animal." Silas took a hesitant step toward Coda. The dog let out a low, vibrating rumble, a profound warning. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, an ancient pickup skidded to a halt. Out stepped Elder Willow, the spiritual authority of the Navajoland. "Stop, Elias," she commanded, her voice cutting through the blizzard's roar. "Do not profane this place further." She stopped directly in front of Coda. Coda bowed his head to her touch. "This is not a mad dog, Elias. This is Coda, the Tashay, the guardian." "He is a witness," Elder Willow stated, looking not at Elias, but directly at Akecheta. "He guards the remains of a broken promise. The time for burying the truth has passed." Akecheta saw his chance. With Willow backing him, he had the momentary shield of community respect. Sheriff, Akecheta said firmly, I am taking Kota into custody for veterinary evaluation before any decision is made. Mick is also secured. We need to follow canine protocol. Elias finally dropped his hand from his holster. Fine, transport them. But I want that dog secured in the isolation kennel, Akecheta. And you are to hand over all evidence and Mick to me the moment you arrive. Do you understand? Understood, Sheriff. Akecheta understood. Elias was giving him rope. He helped Kota and Mick into the cruiser. Before closing the door, he picked up the tattered rag from the ground and quickly shoveled snow over a dark, waterlogged item tucked into the frozen dirt. Whatever Kota was guarding, it was still here. They were driving straight into the heart of the conspiracy. The drive back to the reservation station was a silent, agonizing crawl. Akecheta drove, his mind racing, piecing together the impossible puzzle. Ben was gone, Kota was back, Mick was a shattered pawn, and Elias was waiting like a spider in the heart of the web. He took a sharp turn, opting for a less-used access lane that snaked behind the old feed store. He couldn't risk taking Kota to the isolation kennel as Elias demanded. Isolation meant silence. Silence meant death. Akecheta found a dilapidated, forgotten cabin nestled deep in a copse of frozen pines where he used to fish with Ben. He pulled the cruiser to a halt and released Mick's zip ties. Why, Mick? Why try to burn him? Akecheta asked. Mick leaned forward, his voice a hoarse whisper. They took my daughter's medication. She's got the seizures, officer. They said if I burned the dog and burned the evidence it was guarding, they'd give me enough for a year's supply. Just one simple favor. The system didn't just fail these people. It actively preyed on them. This was calculated leverage, the powerful exploiting the desperation of the powerless. What evidence, Mick? The notebook? Akecheta gestured to the object he had retrieved from the ground at the hollow grave site. A heavy, waterlogged, leather-bound book. Mick flinched from the book. I don't know, officer. He said the dog was a liability, said it was guarding his secret, the thing that would tie him to the old man's death. The old man? Mr. Silas, the deputy's father. Died in the mine collapse, too, a week after Ben. They said it was a carbon monoxide leak. But Silas Sr. knew the tunnels better than his own two hands. Mick pointed to the book. They made me burn the dog, but I couldn't get the book. Kota fought me. He wouldn't let go. Akecheta carefully peeled open the notebook's cover. Deeper inside, protected by the thick leather, he managed to separate 2 pages. The ink was bleeding, but legible. It was a ledger. The few visible lines were sparse, but damning. 2s, 1014, drop CR 20, meet EL, gate 7, 3s, 1016, LV shipment, double the rate, sheriff's boy. Fry 1017, Mesa blackout, final payment. The initials EL screamed Elias. Sheriff's boy could only mean Deputy Silas. The dog, Kota, had been guarding a physical document that connected the drug route to Elias and to the deaths of both Officer Ben and Silas Sr. Mick, Akecheta said, I need you to stay here. Kota and I need to disappear for a while. I promise I will find a way to get your daughter the help she needs. Mick nodded, the relief of confession washing over him. Akecheta carefully tore out the 2 legible pages from the ledger, folding them into a small, tight square. He looked down at Kota. All right, Tashay. We're going to run one more patrol. But this time, we're hunting the hunter. Kota lifted his head. The old warrior spirit, the loyalty forged in fire and loss, was flickering to life. They had to move. The air was so cold it burned in Akecheta's lungs as he and Koda moved off the abandoned track and into the high country. He had swapped his official patrol jacket for an old, thick wool coat and packed the essentials. The folded pages of the ledger, a backup police radio set to an obscure frequency, and a sack of dry biscuits for Koda. Mick was safe for now. Akecheta was officially a fugitive. He had gone AWOL, abandoned his cruiser, and stolen an official K-9 that the sheriff himself had ordered terminated. He looked down at the large German shepherd walking shoulder to shoulder with him. Koda moved with a renewed purpose, the instinct of a professional on patrol. The first hint of trouble came not from the radio, but from the silence on the radio. He switched to the official police channel, listening through his earpiece, and caught the tail end of Sheriff Elias's voice, chillingly calm. Missing. Effective immediately. Deputy Akecheta is to be considered dangerous, possibly suffering from trauma. He has unlawfully taken evidence and a potentially rabid animal. All units are to use extreme caution. The word rabid was a strategic knife thrust. Elias was painting Akecheta as mentally unstable and Koda as a health risk, justifying any extreme measures taken against them. Akecheta was hunted. He needed an ally. He thought immediately of Naomi, Officer Ben's widow. He found a secluded spot behind a mesa rock face, pulling out his burner phone. Naomi, it's Colin Akecheta. Listen to me, you have to be careful. I'm being tracked, but this is about Ben. Colin? I haven't heard from you in 3 years. The accident report was closed, the insurance paid out. Leave the past alone. It wasn't an accident, Naomi. Koda is alive. I found him. He's guarding the evidence that proves Elias was involved in a drug operation that led to Ben's death. I have a ledger. You're talking crazy, Colin. Elias was like a father to Ben. Stop, Colin. You need to turn yourself in. You sound sick. I can't help you. Don't call this number again. Goodbye. The line went dead. A faint click from the police radio in his pocket confirmed his fear. Someone was monitoring the airwaves, waiting for a signal. He had given her names, locations, and the core motive. Elias hadn't needed to track the phone. He had just needed Akecheta to use it. Betrayal was in the trust between friends. Akecheta spoke the command. Koda, search. Koda lowered his massive head, sniffing the ground. He worked a tight circle, then lifted his head toward the east and let out a low, distinct chuff sound. Then Koda broke command, something he would only do if the threat was immediate. He moved 10 yards to a clump of juniper bushes and began to dig furiously in the deep snow. Koda pulled out a small metallic object, no bigger than a cigarette box. It was cold and damp, a small, sophisticated GPS tracking device, the kind used for high-value asset surveillance. It wasn't standard police issue. It was still sticky on one side, meaning it had been forcibly removed from something or someone recently. Koda had found the ghost of a second, more professional surveillance team. This wasn't just a local manhunt orchestrated by Elias. The conspiracy had eyes, ears, and equipment that went far beyond the resources of a reservation sheriff. The hair on Akecheta's neck rose. Koda wasn't just a witness. He was a silent, forgotten counterintelligence expert. They were not the only ones hunting. They were the bait. Chapter 5. The Gate 7 Run. The immediate terrifying reality of the GPS tracker, removed and discarded near their location, forced Akecheta to abandon his initial plan of reaching out to state police. The level of operational security surrounding the conspiracy meant that whoever they were dealing with was highly professional, organized, and likely already infiltrated far beyond the reservation's sheriff's office. They were now truly alone, armed only with a dog's loyalty and 2 tattered pages of evidence. "Gate 7, Akecheta muttered, rubbing Koda's ears. The dog looked up, sensing the new objective, his body coiled with a silent, familiar readiness. Akecheta consulted a decades-old reservation map tucked into his wallet. Gate 7 wasn't an official road marker. It was a secondary entrance to the long-closed Black Mesa Mine complex, a forgotten service road notorious for its crumbling asphalt and steep incline, now likely buried under the blizzard's drifts. It was the perfect entry point for a discreet drop. They began trekking east through the low hills, using the darkness and the cover of the wind-whipped juniper trees. Koda, despite his weakened state, moved with practiced efficiency, often walking ahead and then looping back, checking Akecheta's flanks. The dog wasn't just following, he was running perimeter security. The ledger entry was clear. Meet EL, Gate 7. This meant Sheriff Elias, or someone acting directly on his orders, would be there. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a trap Akecheta was walking into willingly, hoping to surprise the trapper. After nearly 2 hours of brutal travel, Akecheta spotted the telltale sign of the abandoned mine entrance. A towering, rusted steel gate, perpetually locked and sagging on its hinges. It was Gate 7. He and Koda took cover behind a massive, wind-eroded sandstone boulder overlooking the access road. The snow continued to fall relentlessly. Akecheta pulled out a pair of old, military-grade binoculars he'd kept in his bag, scanning the scene. A light was visible about 100 yards down the road, not a headlight, but the dome light of a parked vehicle, casting a soft orange glow through the swirling snow. It was a dark, unmarked pickup truck, non-standard issue but clearly police-affiliated. A figure was leaning against the truck, bundled up, checking a digital device impatiently. Akecheta focused the binoculars. The man was young, his face drawn tight with cold and stress. It was Deputy Silas. A wave of bitter disappointment hit Akecheta. Silas was Officer Ben's younger cousin, a man Ben had mentored and pushed toward law enforcement. The sheriff's boy line in the ledger now meant Silas wasn't just an unwitting puppet. He was actively involved in covering up the murder of his own cousin and, possibly, his father. Akecheta whispered to Koda, "Silas, Ben's cousin." Koda let out a deep, soft whine, a sound of profound grief and recognition. He remembered Silas. Akecheta checked his own sidearm. He was officially a fugitive, and Silas was operating under orders to treat him as dangerous. He couldn't just walk up and talk. He needed leverage. He needed the drop. Just then, a second set of headlights appeared on the access road. A low-slung sedan moving carefully through the snow, definitely not local. It was the LV shipment mentioned in the ledger. Silas straightened up, pulling a flashlight and flashing a quick, practiced signal. 3 short bursts. The sedan returned the signal. Akecheta knew his window was closing. He had to act before the transaction was complete and the evidence was transferred. "Koda," Akecheta commanded, his voice tight. "Patrol, quiet." The K-9 needed no further instruction. Koda melted into the snow, a shadow amongst shadows, moving around the perimeter of the boulder. Akecheta took a deep breath, clutching the folded pages of the ledger in his coat pocket. As the driver of the sedan stepped out, a heavy-set man in a dark suit, clearly an outsider, Akecheta stood up from behind the boulder, holding his hands wide, but his eyes focused on Silas. "Don't move, Deputy Silas." Akecheta's voice echoed unnaturally in the wind. "It wasn't an accident, and I have the proof." The drug runner froze, but Silas's reaction was immediate and desperate. He spun around, hand flashing to his holster. Akecheta saw the terror in Silas's eyes, the terror of a man caught, but also the terror of a man who knew he couldn't back out. "Colin, you're sick. Drop your weapon and surrender," Silas shouted, his voice cracking. "I don't have a weapon drawn, Silas. You do. But the evidence you tried to burn is safe. Tell me the truth. Did Elias make you do it? Did you help him kill Ben and your father?" Silas stared at Akecheta, his mouth twisting in a silent battle between fear and self-preservation. Then his eyes flickered past Akecheta, toward the juniper trees. It wasn't Elias or the sheriff's backup. It was Coda. The guardian had circled around, appearing silently behind Silas, the massive dog now standing motionless, his low rumble a promise of immediate violence should Silas choose wrong. Silas swallowed hard. His hand slowly retreated from his holster, dropping the flashlight. The light rolled across the frozen ground, illuminating a dark, frozen stain in the snow. The stain wasn't oil. It was blood. The silence following Akecheta's accusation at Gate 7 was heavier than the blizzard itself, amplifying the shame burning in Deputy Silas's eyes. The drug runner, a hulking outsider named Leo, stood frozen by Coda's sudden appearance, his hand hovering near the trunk of the car where the illicit cargo lay. "Silas, that blood," Akecheta pressed, keeping his voice low but firm, nodding at the dark patch of frozen earth. "Tell me where it came from. Tell me why Elias had you covering this spot." Silas took a ragged, desperate breath, looking from Akecheta to Coda, who remained a terrifyingly still sentinel. "It's from Ben, when the accident was arranged. Ben wasn't crushed inside the shaft, Colin. He was hit out here, right here. Elias hit him, then they dragged him in after. The blood. It was the last piece of proof Elias needed to eliminate. He made me clean it up." The brutal, cold truth of murder, not misadventure, sliced through Akecheta's professional detachment. Silas hadn't pulled the trigger, but he had signed his soul over to the lie. Leo, seizing the opportunity presented by Silas's confession, lunged for the package in the trunk. "Enough of this high desert dust-up. Drop the animal." Akecheta didn't even have to issue a command. Coda, responding to the threat against his former partner's friend, reacted with the surgical precision of his training. The massive dog moved low, snapping not at flesh, but at the man's forearm, delivering a pressure point bite that caused Leo to drop instantly to his knees, clutching his numb arm. It was a perfect non-lethal incapacitation designed to neutralize. "He's secured. Now talk, Silas, quickly," Akecheta demanded. Silas, seizing his one moment of moral clarity, pointed toward Leo's sedan. "The money. It's not just a cash drop. Elias is buying a shell corporation through that Las Vegas contact. It's to cover the real money, the dirty coal money they laundered before the mine closed. Ben and my dad found the ledger on the 10th floor of the old Black Mesa HQ, not here. They were trying to call it in when Elias found them. This drop is the final payoff. The 10th floor, the executive offices." Akecheta felt the scale of the betrayal expand. This wasn't local corruption. It was a high-level organized criminal enterprise using the reservation's law enforcement as a shield. Suddenly, the night erupted with the roar of a powerful engine and the grinding sound of a four-wheel drive spinning tires in the snow. Headlights, powerful and blinding, rounded the bend. Too fast, too aggressive for the conditions. "That's Elias!" Silas screamed, his momentary courage dissolving into absolute panic. "He must have been monitoring the radio frequency. Go! He'll kill us both now that I've talked." Akecheta knew he couldn't take Elias and his men in a firefight. He had the confession and the ledger pages, but he needed to survive to use them. Silas made a desperate, redemptive choice. He grabbed a heavy wrench from his truck bed and, with a guttural cry, slammed it into the sheriff's approaching vehicle, targeting the driver's side headlight. The glass shattered, the headlight went dark, temporarily blinding the oncoming vehicle. "Get out of here, Colin! Tell my mom I tried! Go!" Akecheta heard the sheriff's enraged shout as the vehicle skidded to a stop. He slapped Koda's flank, the urgency in his voice undeniable. "Koda, run!" The two fugitives bounded away from Gate 7 and into the deeper, freezing wilderness. The sounds of shouting voices and the heavy thud of a man hitting the snow, Silas, undoubtedly being subdued, fading behind them. They were heading deeper into the freezing night, closer to the truth, and now they had a new, deadly target, the 10th floor of the Hollow Grave HQ. The blizzard had subsided to a cruel, thin sleet, and the world was now painted in shades of gray, the exact color of desperation. Akecheta and Koda ran east, putting distance between themselves and the violence they'd left at Gate 7. Silas's sacrifice, that one moment of desperate courage, had bought them time. But Akecheta knew Elias wouldn't be far behind. The sheriff had lost his pawn and his proof of a Las Vegas connection. He would now hunt them with pure, unfiltered rage. Their destination was the Hollow Grave HQ, the monstrous relic of the Black Mesa Corporation. It sat like a dark, angular tomb on the horizon, a 10-story skeleton of concrete and glass, abandoned since the mine closure stripped the reservation bare. The building was a physical manifestation of the broken promises Elder Willow had spoken of. As they approached, Koda moved into full patrol mode, low to the ground, his ears swiveling. The HQ should have been dark, but Akecheta saw it, a single, faint, sickly yellow light flickering on the 10th floor. The executive suite, the final payment for a life's worth of corruption. "They haven't just left it, boy," Akecheta muttered to Koda. "They're running an office up there." They found entry through the loading dock, a gaping maw in the building's side where decades of snow and dust had created ramp-like drifts. The air inside was freezing, smelling of stale paper, wet concrete, and the deep, chemical taint of disuse. The main bank of elevators was predictably dead. Akecheta pulled his flashlight, its beam swallowed by the vast, echoing darkness of the lobby. "We take the stairs, Koda. 10 flights. Stay sharp." The climb was brutal. Each floor was a museum of corporate decay, shattered photocopiers, desks piled high with moldering annual reports, and walls scarred with graffiti left by bored kids long ago. Koda's heavy breathing was the only sound besides the crunch of their boots on broken glass and the ceaseless whine of the wind tearing at the shattered windows. They reached the 9th floor, exhausted and numb. Akecheta paused, checking the door leading up to the executive suite. It was a heavy, fire-rated door, and it was slightly ajar. A sliver of the 10th floor light spilled out, along with a very faint, metallic smell of fresh cigarette smoke. Someone was up there. Koda tensed, a low, subsonic growl vibrating deep in his chest. Akecheta gently stroked the dog's head, conveying a silent command for absolute silence. They slipped through the door, moving onto the polished marble of the top floor. This wasn't abandoned like the floors below. The 10th floor was cold, but structurally sound, shielded from the elements. A corridor led to a corner office suite. The yellow light was coming from there. Akecheta pressed himself against the wall, listening. He could hear the faint tap-tap-tap of a computer keyboard. It wasn't Elias. It was someone diligently working, finalizing the Shell Corporation deal, transferring the dirty coal money. He signaled Coda to stay, then crept to the doorway of the office. He peered around the frame. A man, a clean, non-local type in a nice coat, was sitting at a desk, illuminated by a single, expensive-looking desk lamp. He was clearly the Las Vegas contact, the LV shipment, now hard at work. Akecheta's eyes darted around the room, searching for the ledger. Ben and Silas Sr. hadn't found it on the desk. Silas had said they found it on the 10th floor and were trying to call it in when Elias found them. It had to be hidden nearby. He scanned the old-fashioned executive furniture, a heavy oak bookshelf, a globe, and a deep-set, dusty fireplace. Nothing. Then, Coda let out a sudden, sharp, almost silent chuff from the corridor. It wasn't a warning about the man at the desk. It was a warning about the entrance. Akecheta glanced at the hallway, but it was too late. The heavy clunk of the main fire door on the first floor closing echoed up the stairwell, the sound confirming Elias and his backup had arrived. They hadn't needed the tracker. They were tracking the car Akecheta abandoned, knowing the target was always the HQ. The Las Vegas man jumped up from the desk, grabbing a satellite phone. "They're here. Get the hell out of—" Before the man could finish, Akecheta burst into the room. The man lunged for a briefcase, but Coda was faster. The German shepherd, having ignored the outside threat to protect his partner, was now through the door, snapping the phone from the man's hand and crushing it in one decisive bite. Akecheta slammed the man back against the wall, disarming him of a small sidearm. "Where is the ledger? Where did Ben put the proof?" The man spat a curse. "You're dead, Deputy. Elias is already on the stairs. You won't make it out with anything." Akecheta looked again at the massive fireplace. Coda was staring at it, his tail giving a tiny, almost imperceptible thump-thump against the carpet. Akecheta saw it then. The brickwork on the hearth, just below the mantelpiece, was slightly cleaner than the rest, freshly dusted. He smashed the desk lamp into the hearth. The light revealed a shallow indentation, a hidden cavity where the brickwork was disturbed. Akecheta jammed the edge of his knife into the crack and pulled. A heavy, flat metal box, rusted but sealed, slid out from the recess. It was large enough to hold the complete, original Black Mesa ledger, the truth about the laundered coal money and the 3 years of murder. He had it. But the sound of heavy boots on the marble floor of the 9th floor landing confirmed the threat. Elias was here. "He's up there! Take him down!" Elias roared from the stairwell. Akecheta grabbed the metal box. "Coda! Window!" The only way out was up or out. The window was their only hope. Elias Thorne burst onto the 10th floor, his face contorted in a mask of pure, murderous rage. Behind him stood 2 deputies, loyal only to his corruption. The Las Vegas contact, having just been disarmed, was still staggering against the executive desk. Akecheta gripped the heavy metal ledger box, its cold steel shocking against his skin, a strange counterweight to the sudden, overwhelming heat of the confrontation. This box was the truth, the justification for everything that had been lost. "Akecheta! Drop that box and the gun. You're trespassing, interfering with an active investigation, and you just assaulted a federal operative." Elias snarled, already aiming his service weapon. His voice echoed, the sound thin and brittle against the howling wind outside. "It's not an investigation, Elias. It's a cleanup. You murdered Ben. You murdered Silas Sr. for this." Akecheta retorted, holding the contact between himself and the incoming fire. He knew a head-on fight was impossible. He was outgunned and standing on the precipice of a 10-story drop. The only path to survival was the terrifying one he had shouted seconds earlier. Akecheta glanced at Koda. The dog understood. He positioned the heavy metal box low, like a bowling ball, and shoved it across the polished marble floor toward his partner. "Koda, now, go!" The Las Vegas man cried out, stumbling into the path of Elias's men, providing Akecheta with a crucial second of distraction. Koda didn't hesitate. With a powerful, desperate lunge, he hit the corner window. The tempered safety glass didn't shatter, but exploded inward in a dizzying cascade of razor-sharp shards. The office instantly filled with a cyclonic blast of freezing air and snow. Elias fired. The round hit the oak bookshelf directly behind where Akecheta had been standing, sending fragments of wood scattering. Akecheta, moving with the desperate calculus of a hunted animal, didn't head for the hole in the window. He ran for the corner of the office and smashed the heavy metal box, the ledger, against the dry-walled partition hiding the building's old utility shaft. Ben and Silas Sr. would have planned an escape. The thin wall of the derelict building cracked and gave way, revealing a dark, vertical void. The access space for the massive, unused cargo elevator cables. An iron ladder, rusted but still bolted to the wall, ran straight down. "He's escaping. The shaft. Don't let him get the ledger," Elias screamed. Akecheta hurled the metal box into the shaft. It tumbled, clanging against the walls, before landing with a muffled, solid thud on a lower platform. He then vaulted into the opening. Koda, with unnatural agility, squeezed through the tight space right behind him, protecting his partner's flank. Elias reached the opening just as Akecheta found the iron ladder. "You won't escape, Colin, not with that proof." Akecheta started his frantic descent, the freezing iron biting into his gloves, the wind screaming through the shaft opening above him. Elias, too large to follow, aimed his gun down the narrow gap, forcing Akecheta to hug the wall. "Run, Koda!" Akecheta yelled, knowing the dog would only go if ordered. Koda jumped, a 10-story drop that would have killed a lesser animal. But Koda didn't fall. He locked his powerful claws onto the cables, using his training to break his fall against the heavy, grease-coated lines until he reached the platform where the ledger box had landed. Akecheta scrambled down 5 flights before dropping onto the same rusted platform, pulling Koda and the ledger box close. They were now level with the 5th floor. Elias's voice boomed down the shaft. "I'm having my men meet you at the ground floor. You'll never make it out of the desert, Colin." Akecheta looked down. The remaining 5 stories were a dark, endless drop. He checked the metal box. It was dented but sealed. The evidence was safe. He had to get to safety, but where? The res wasn't safe, the police were compromised, and the government was hours away. He finally remembered the one place Elias would never think to look for him, a place of sanctuary rooted in the deepest traditions of the land. Elder Willow's cabin. He pushed Koda forward into the darkness, whispering, "Willows, south. We run." They had the evidence, but the fight was far from over. It had just moved to the only place left to hide. The run from the hollow grave HQ was a blur of aching lungs and burning muscles. The terrain here wasn't paved road. It was harsh, frozen badlands, unforgiving to a man already running on fumes. Akecheta followed the old game trails he hadn't used since he was a boy. Koda's shadow flickering beside him, the heavy ledger box clutched like a life raft. They had been running for what felt like hours when the small, familiar cabin finally came into view. It sat deep in a hidden ravine, shielded by juniper trees, a place where the modern world rarely intruded. A thin wisp of cedar smoke curled from the chimney, a sign of life and warmth that made Akecheta's heart ache with tired relief. As they approached, Koda gave a weary whimper, slowing his pace. The dog had been running hard since Gate 7, and the brutal 10-story drop had taken its toll. He didn't collapse, but he sank onto his belly in the shelter of the porch, eyes fixed on the door, still the vigilant guard. Akecheta kicked the snow from his boots and pushed the door open. Elder Willow was inside, just as he had known she would be. She was sitting at a rough-hewn table, the cabin illuminated by the soft, golden light of a kerosene lamp. She wasn't startled. She wasn't even surprised. She simply looked at him, her dark, ancient eyes holding all the exhaustion of 1,000 generations. She was stirring a cup of herbal tea, the steam rising faintly into the still air. "Come in, Colin," she said, her voice low and steady, a tone that settled the nerves but offered no comfort. "You look like you've seen the end of the world." Akecheta didn't move fully into the warmth. He held the rusted metal box tightly. "You knew Silas Sr. came here with Ben. You knew they had this." He dropped the box onto the wooden floor with a bone-jarring clang. "Why didn't you help them?" Willow placed her spoon down deliberately. "I helped them find the truth, Colin. That's all I could do. The rest, that was their choice." Akecheta felt a deep, sickening knot forming in his stomach. He wasn't looking at a grieving matriarch. He was looking at someone who had accepted a horrible calculus. He pulled his heavy hunting knife and jammed the tip into the seal of the metal box. Rusted bolts screamed in protest as he leveraged the lid open. Inside, resting on a bed of dry, brittle paper, was the original Black Mesa ledger. It wasn't just a book of numbers. It was a record of betrayals. Akecheta pulled out the top sheet. It was a signed memorandum from 3 years ago, detailing the legal transfer of a crucial mining access lease. He scanned the names. Elias Thorne's signature, messy and brutal, was on the bottom. But right above it, listed as the primary lessor representing tribal interests, was a name that made Akecheta freeze, the freezing air of the night suddenly irrelevant. It was the name of Willow's own grandson, Silas Jr., the boy who had been found dead just before Ben. "Silas Jr.," Akecheta whispered, the knife slipping from his grasp. He was the link. He signed away the land. Willow didn't deny it. She finally looked down, the first sign of pain on her stoic face. He was weak. They tempted him with money and power. He thought he could outsmart them, take a cut and pay off the tribe's debts. He thought he was a savior. Elias found out. And when Silas came to me, terrified, I helped him hide the book here. And then you stood by while Elias killed the people trying to bring the truth out? Akecheta's voice was raw with exhaustion and disgust. Willow rose slowly, moving toward the small, narrow window that faced the ravine path. "The tribe is dying, Colin. The coal is all we have left. Elias promised that if I was quiet, if I let him take out the few who knew the extent of the betrayal, Ben, Silas Sr., now you, he would guarantee the land sale goes through, and the money would secure the future for the rest of us." She turned back, her eyes bleak. "Sacrifice is the hard truth of survival, Deputy. I chose the tribe over the few." As she spoke, a beam of harsh, bright light suddenly sliced through the trees, illuminating the small cabin windows, a car headlight, followed by the crunching sound of tires on the frozen ground outside. Akecheta didn't need to look. He knew that sound, and he knew who it was. Elias. "You called him," Akecheta stated flatly, his heart sinking with the certainty of it. Willow looked at him with profound sorrow. "He knows I have a direct line to the federal agencies, Colin. He made me choose. Turn you over with the ledger, or watch him destroy the reservation piece by piece. Akecheta scrambled. He scooped up the metal box, realizing the cabin was a trap, a quiet, calculated betrayal. Koda, sensing the imminent threat, pulled himself up, giving one final warning bark before collapsing again, his strength gone. "You had your sanctuary, Deputy." Elias's voice roared from outside. "The jig is finally up." Chapter 10. The Reckoning. The ravine air grew thick with the stench of engine exhaust and the coarse, metallic reek of human malice. Elias Thorne's voice, a bullhorn of entitlement, boomed against the canyon walls, scattering the silence of the night. "You've caused me quite enough trouble, Deputy Akecheta. Hand over the Black Mesa ledger and step out slowly. We can end this quietly, right here." Akecheta gripped the metal box. The words "quietly" and "end" sounded like dirt shoveling onto his coffin. He glanced at Elder Willow, who stood rigid, watching the flickering kerosene lamp rather than him. She was a monument to a terrible choice, her silence now a heavier burden than any noise. He bent down beside Koda, whose breath was shallow and ragged. "Stay, boy," he whispered, stroking the dog's head. Koda managed a single, weak lick to his hand. Akecheta knew he couldn't fight and protect the dog simultaneously. The time for talk was over. Akecheta spun, grabbed the blazing kerosene lamp from the table, and hurled it with all his remaining strength toward the wood stove, where dry cedar kindling was stacked. The lamp shattered with a violent blast of glass and oil-fueled flame. In an instant, the far corner of the small cabin ignited. Smoke billowed, thick and acrid, forcing Akecheta to drop low to the floor. Outside, the clamor of men shouting erupted. "Fire! He torched the cabin? Get him!" Akecheta used the searing chaos as his cover. He scrambled to the narrow back window, shoved the heavy ledger box through the pane, and followed it, tearing his coat on the splintered frame. The window was barely large enough, but the bone-deep chill of the night hit him, a welcome slap of sobriety. He landed hard in the snow, the breath knocked out of him. He grabbed the box and scrambled up the steep, icy embankment of the ravine. The fire was growing rapidly, turning the small cabin into a beacon, a desperate funeral pyre for the truth that had been hidden there. He could hear Elias below, his voice now high-pitched with fury. "Don't let him get out of the ravine. He's heading towards the old border crossing." Akecheta didn't look back. He ran on instinct, fueled by adrenaline and the heavy truth in his hands. The ledger was a heavy burden, physically and morally, but it was the only thing that mattered. He burst out of the ravine, staggering onto a flat, frozen field, a desolate clearing near the reservation boundary. He hadn't gone more than 20 yards when a colossal figure stepped out of the shadows cast by the moon. It was Elias Thorne. Alone. He must have skirted the upper edge of the ravine, predicting Akecheta's exit. Elias was a mountain of a man, clad in thick leather and dark wool. He stood with his legs planted wide, a heavy, custom-made hunting rifle resting casually in his hands. "You're slow, Deputy," Elias sneered, his breath pluming white in the sub-zero air. "I told Willow you'd run exactly here. You reservation boys are predictable." Akecheta stopped, his chest heaving, his muscles screaming. He held the metal box like a shield. "You don't care about this land. You just wanted the lease money." "Money? It's not about the money, Colin. It's about power," Elias corrected, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "It's about showing these weak, dying people that the future is built by men like me. Silas Sr. and Ben were sentimental fools. They let emotion cloud the deal. I am making the deal work." "You murdered them to cover a land grab," Akecheta retorted, finding a sudden, cold calm. Elias chuckled, a low, guttural sound. An occupational hazard. Now drop the box. If you give me the ledger, I'll let you walk. You can go back to being a nobody deputy who lost his partner in a tragic accident. Akecheta looked at the ledger, then back at the man who represented the absolute corrosion of justice. This box isn't evidence, Elias. It's the verdict. In a split second, Akecheta didn't charge or draw his sidearm. He hurled the heavy metal ledger box straight at Elias's face. Elias, momentarily stunned by the unexpected attack, raised the rifle to block the blow. The box hit the barrel and the stock with a sharp, sickening crack. The rifle flew from Elias's numb fingers, skidding across the ice. Akecheta didn't wait. He closed the distance in 3 desperate strides, dodging the large man's sweeping right hook. He drove his shoulder hard into Elias's sternum. The blow staggered the larger man, but Elias recovered instantly, his immense hands grabbing Akecheta's collar. They tumbled onto the slick, frozen ground, grappling in the darkness. Elias was stronger, heavier, fueled by rage. He pinned Akecheta down, his breath rank with sweat and adrenaline. "You should have stayed retired," Elias roared, his hands closing around Akecheta's throat. Akecheta felt the pressure, the black spots dancing behind his eyes. He thrashed desperately, his hand sweeping the ground until his fingers closed around something sharp and cold. The corner of the metal ledger box. With a final surge of primal strength, Akecheta leveraged his body and slammed the heavy metal corner up, blindly, into Elias's jaw. The sound was muffled but decisive. Elias's grip immediately loosened, a strangled gasp escaping his throat. He reared back, covering his face, his roar now a pathetic whimper. Akecheta rolled free, pulling his service pistol. He was shaking, blinded by tears of pain and exhaustion, but the gun was steady. Elias stumbled, trying to find his fallen rifle. "It's over, Elias," Akecheta managed, his voice hoarse from the choke. Elias stopped, standing tall for a second. Then he began to laugh, a wheezing, broken sound. "This won't stop the deal, Deputy. The machine is too big. You are just one broken man." But before Elias could take another step, the silence was shattered by a new sound. The insistent wail of a distant siren, growing closer, echoing off the canyon walls. Willow's earlier betrayal, giving Akecheta the false sense of security in the cabin, was only half the story. She had called in the federal authorities just before Elias arrived. Elias froze, his face finally showing true fear. Akecheta lowered his gun slightly. Justice had finally arrived. Not by his single hand, but by the weight of the evidence and the fractured conscience of an old woman. By the time the first Federal Bureau vehicle crested the hill, Elias Thorne was on his knees, staring blankly at the metal box resting on the ice. The Black Mesa ledger had survived. Colin Akecheta stood over it, utterly spent, watching the lights cut through the darkness, ushering in the cold, hard dawn of a new and uncertain day for the reservation. And that brings us to the end of Colin Akecheta's desperate flight. It's a story of fire, ice, and the brutal, chilling truth that sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones holding the match. But the story isn't over until we understand the choices that were made. If you were Colin, with the ledger in your hands and the flames at your back, would you seek revenge on Elder Willow? Or would you find a way to forgive the betrayal? I want to hear your thoughts on this moral crossroad. Leave a comment down below and let us know what you would have done to survive that night. If you're captivated by deep dives into courage, consequence, and the hidden histories that shaped America. Then you won't want to miss what's coming up next. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell. Next week, we're digging into a legend right from the heart of the bayou. The ghost priest of St. Jude Parish. A decades-old mystery that proves not all ghosts are confined to the grave. Until next time, remember this. When the smoke clears, the truth always leaves a stain. The ultimate betrayal. Colin Akecheta's home, burned by Elder Willow, hidden American history legend. Have you ever faced betrayal from the one person you trusted the most? In this intense episode, we dive deep into the life-or-death moment of Colin Akecheta as he is forced to flee, with the flames set by Elder Willow burning right behind him. This isn't just a survival story. It's a tragedy about courage and the consequences of buried secrets. Colin's desperate escape, carrying the ledger, a book filled with shocking truths, uncovers a dark and hidden part of American history. We will analyze the moral crossroads Colin faces, seeking revenge against his betrayer or finding a way to forgive this brutality. The tale of Colin Akecheta proves that. When the smoke clears, the truth always leaves a stain. Discussion Corner. If you were Colin, with the ledger in your hands, would you choose revenge or forgiveness? Comment below and share your choice. Don't miss out. Next week, we explore another chilling mystery right in the heart of the bayou. The ghost priest of St. Jude Parish, a legend spanning decades. Hit subscribe and ring the bell to tune in. Keywords topics: American legend, your betrayal story, hidden history, the ledger, survival, moral dilemma, too. I've targeted hashtags: American legend, hidden history, ultimate betrayal, Colin Akecheta, the ledger, 3, pinned comment. Colin Akecheta's flight teaches us a harsh lesson. The truth always leaves a stain. What do you think Colin should do with Elder Willow? Revenge or forgiveness? Comment below with your thoughts. And if you love intense, mysterious history stories like this one, hit subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the next episode.